at National Operations Center of Excellence. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the agenda. We went through the welcome. Now we're going to go through a brief introduction of the participants that are around the table. Real quick, let me pull up my notes real quick. Starting in the upper left, we have Marco Cameron. Marco is a transportation engineer in the Traffic Operations Division at TxDOT. Coming clockwise, we have Paul Pafrades, Senior Transportation Planner with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Next, we have Natalie Betker. Natalie is a Senior Program Manager for the North Texas Council of Governments. We have Tracy Bramwell from Iowa DOT. She's the Social Media Content Manager there. Coming down clockwise, we have Solomon Cavanis. He's a Special Projects Manager for Planning and Operations at the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. Next, we have Monica Hallwood. She's a Traffic Operations Engineer for Washington State DOT. And then finally, we have Kofi Wahisi, Supervisor for the Transportation Access and Mobility Division at Atlanta Regional Commission, or ARC. We're going to jump right into the roundtable. We have allotted the last 20 to 30 minutes for a Q&A. We have a pretty packed agenda, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into the roundtable. The way how it's going to work is we have the topics here that from a given agency, and once that agency has thrown their topic onto the table, we will go clockwise around the table, starting with Solomon giving his topic from Jersey. Then we'll move to Monica and Kofi going clockwise around the room for a response. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Solomon to present his first topic. Solomon, you may be on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity, Daniel, and good afternoon, everyone. As the topics are presented, they are in a form of questions for input from the roundtable. So I'll present the question and provide you background for what we've done here in North Jersey. So for institutional sustainability of TSMO, have plans been developed to help sponsorship of TSMO programs for the long-term advancement of state programs? For example, SHARP 2, Organizing for Liability, grant Everyday Counts. So here in our region, NJTPA, in our region, we have partnered and worked with the New Jersey Department of Transportation, with the MPOs in New Jersey, which are 3, and some of the operating agencies to develop a TSMO plan known as the Connected Corridor. So this plan was developed to, 1, update the ITS architecture for the state of New Jersey statewide, and also to have a unified program where the agencies can come together and present projects, topics, share information. So we leveraged the SHARP 2 Organizing for Liability grant for a capability maturity model, and we used the Connected Corridor as the TSMO plan, and we're currently working to deliver a business case for TSMO. So we are looking to a June completion and trying to identify grant opportunities and collaboration opportunities for advancing TSMO strategies and communicating TSMO to executives and to the agency. So that's what we have here in the NJTPA region ongoing.
Okay, thanks, Solomon. Right now, Monica is having some technical difficulties with her audio, so we're going to jump to Kofi for his
response to Solomon's topic? Kofi, you may be on mute. I think you still may be on mute. You may need to check your local mute button on your phone.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Daniel. And that's a good question Solomon had. And in the Atlanta region, I would say we've had like a cyclical process when it comes to having a sustainable institutional framework for TSMOs. So it's kind of gone up and down over the past 10 or 20 years. And when we did have what I would say pretty noticeable coordination across multiple jurisdictions, it was typically over a specific program or project, like for example, the Regional Traffic Operations Program, and the predecessor to that a few years ago or 10 years ago was the Regional Traffic Signal Timing Project, where we did have multiple stakeholders involved and engaged on an ongoing basis. But again, it was limited to specific projects or programs that had specific funding or objectives tied to it. Outside of that, I've noticed sort of like a lull in that type of engagement and coordination at the regional level. However, I guess certain parts of the region work closer together, like maybe you might see a couple counties work closer together. So overall, TSMO, I'd say it's been cyclical, but there's, I guess, a silver lining to that specifically as it relates to incident management. From a regional and even now statewide perspective, that has always been sort of like the poster child for ongoing, sustainable TSMO coordination. But again, it was only focused on quick clearance and incident management coordination. So that pretty much sums up what's going on in the Atlanta area as it relates to sustaining TSMO and from an institutional perspective.
All right. Thanks, thanks, Kofi. Let's get a response from Marco in TxDOT.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I was looking at this question, and what jumped out at me was Everyday Counts initiative. I think this question may be or could be answered a little bit differently depending on the district or region in Texas. But just to take the Everyday Counts initiative, for example, we had the road weather management capability maturity framework workshops in Texas. We had two of them last year, one in our Dallas-Fort Worth area and another one in Houston. And right now we're in the process of statewide to look at the best approach to develop TSMO program plans for each of the various districts. And there are 25 districts in the state of Texas as a part of TxDOT. And just for an example, we plan to incorporate input from work being done under the separate programs such as EDC4 and road weather management is one of the initiatives. So with the work that we're doing as part of those separate initiatives, we look at using that as input to the TSMO program plans that we plan to develop for the districts. And we have started with one district already. The Austin district is the first district in TxDOT to kick off the development of a TSMO program plan. They serve as somewhat of a pilot district because they're first, and we hope to apply some of the lessons learned and best practices across the state. By the end of the calendar year 2018, We hope to kick off TSMO program plan development in at least the metro districts of TxDOT, the 5 metro districts. And then beyond that, as we get those up and running, we plan to expand to the urban and rural districts. So that's about it. That's what I have for that question there. I'll pass it back over to you, Daniel.
All right. Thanks, Marco. Paul, let's get a response from the Valley Commission.
Sure. Here at DBRPC, we work with our partners in PennDOT and New Jersey DOT on a lot of different projects. Some of the biggest ones are TIN task forces that we have, that we facilitate along with the help of PennDOT and New Jersey DOT. We work with both states in collecting TIN data so we can present it to our first responders and get a better lay of the land and how we can improve things. And in New Jersey, we're also working with the DOT on traffic signal performance data. We have a project that's run through DBRPC, that signal retiming project. It's 100% CMAQ funded. And through that project, we're retiming signals, and with New Jersey DOT, we'll start collecting some data from those traffic signals where we can to start compiling some performance data. So that's really where we stand at the moment.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Let's get a response from Natalie.
Yeah, in terms of the North Central Texas Council of Governments, the MPO for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in terms for sustaining kind of the long-term advancement of TSMO type programs, we do that in a few ways. One is in our long-range transportation plan, we have a section just on TSMO. And TSMO is a priority within our region, and that actually comes as second in line after maintenance of what comes off the budget in our long-range transportation plan. So that's kind of a long-term means for us to sustain a focus on TSMO within our region, in which our policy level folks adopt that plan, and they recognize that TSMO is an effective solution to dealing with congestion and safety problems that we have within the region. In terms of kind of more shorter term, rather than looking out as far as our long-range transportation plan, we do have recurring stakeholder meetings in which we engage the stakeholders and get feedback for, one, our ITS strategic plan, which looks more at a more 5 to 10 year time frame and identifies projects in that, those TSMO type projects that could be funded. So that's a plan that we use to pull projects from when we get funding available to us. So we hope to continue to utilize that as kind of a long-term sustaining focus, that TSMO is important and it can be very cost-effective in implementing different types of strategies and solving some of the transportation issues we have within the region.
Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from Tracy Bramwell. Tracy, from what I understand, you have someone else in the room with you as well?
I do. I've got Donna Matulak, who is our Assistant Director of our Operations Bureau, and I'm going to have her take this since she's more integrated into that system than I am. So.
All right. So I guess in Iowa, we have got, we use Sharp 2 funding to develop our TSMO strategic plan, and then we also have a TSMO program plan. Both of those are kind of set the business case for the agency as far as where we want to go with TSMO. The third piece of what we are doing is we have 8 service layer plans that really get down into the focus areas and lay out kind of what we're doing with our operations system, where we want to go with it, what our assets are, and kind of laying out what our next steps are that we need to do to fully integrate and implement TSMO across the agency. And thank you. And our plans, we do have a update cycle laid out for each of our plans. Our overall program plan is on a 5-year cycle, but then each of the service layer plans are actually on a 3-year cycle so that we can keep them fresh, make sure that the entire agency is involved with those, making sure that they are meeting the current needs. So we're going to continue to update those to make sure that we're still going in the right direction with the agency.
Okay. And what was your name again? I'm sorry.
Donna Matulak.
Donna Matulak. Thank you, Donna. I'm trying to give Monica an opportunity to read the first topic. We've been kind of wrestling behind the scenes, getting her audio together, and I think we have accomplished that. So let's check to see if Monica Hallwood from Washington DOT, if you're ready to provide a response.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Whew, I feel like I should be able to go home for the day now, just getting connected, so there we go. All right, so number one, the institutional sustainability of TSMO. For WSDOT, primarily that has been, of recent, has been with our SHARP 2 programs that have focused on TSMO education, and not just necessarily executive endorsement, but at every level of staff within the agency, from executive to mid-level management to staff level. We're not fully through that process, but the primary means of doing that was developing our TSMO website, which basically and simply just defines what TSMO is, how WSDOT defines it, and then what all the different strategies within the TSMO umbrella is. And so that sounds very simplistic in terms of sustainability, but our approach is that if everyone understands TSMO, we no longer have to rely just on champions, but that it becomes part of the culture. And so I'm just going to, that's my reply for that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Well, let me check back with Solomon to see if you got everything that you needed, or do you have something that you need someone to elaborate on?
No, that's great. I appreciate the response there. Thank you.
All right. Well, going to the next topic. The next topic will come from Marco Cameron at TxDOT.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So this question here has to do with integrating the integration of planning and operations. With TSMO, one of the main tenets of TSMO is that operators and planners work together to improve the reliability of the transportation system. And at TxDOT, the TSMO initiative has mostly been led by operations type personnel. But over the last year or so that we've been active with our TSMO program, we have sought after and have received more engagement from our planning personnel at the division level, and I would say at the district level as well. But it's not moving at, initially wasn't moving at the pace that I thought it should. In hindsight, I think that was okay. I think when you try to engage too large of a group at first, that might not necessarily be the most efficient approach. But what I want to get from the panel is how you've gone about facilitating that working relationship engagement of those two functional areas for one, to ensure TSMO is understood and prioritized, but number two, basically, just understood and prioritized, because what I was going to say was related to funding, and I think as you prioritize TSMO, perhaps funding, will go along with that. So that's my question. How have the agencies facilitated a working relationship between operations and planning?
Thanks, Marco. Let's start with getting a response from Paul.
Sure. Being an MPO, we have a little different side to things, but we worked very closely, once again, with New Jersey DOT and PennDOT. New Jersey DOT, we're part of their complete team, which pretty much does what Marco was asking. It brings planners and operators together on a pretty regular basis to discuss different projects that are going on in the region. PennDOT also has their own type of system called PennDOT Connects, where various people, especially here at BBRPC, we take a look at projects and go through and answer some questions based on our expertise to then pass on to PennDOT. And then within BBRPC, our operations group, there's only three of us now, hopefully four in the near future, that work in the operations unit. But then on the planning side, we have multiple units: corridor planning, smart growth, bike ped transit, freight, and aviation. So we've been doing a better job recently of all working together, not only discussing projects among the units, but then when projects do come up, having multiple units work on the project together to get all perspectives, especially for us, the TSMO perspective in a project, and make sure things are being put in as they should from the start, not as afterthoughts at the end of a project. So that's our take at DBRPC.
Thanks, Paul. Next up is Natalie.
Similar to Paul, in our region, what we have found is bringing folks in early to have those conversations makes it easier from the planning as well as the programming of funding side. So if you can engage those folks in your projects as you begin to talk about them, one, it helps them understand what you're trying to do, and two, it helps on the back end to make sure that it continues to move through the process. And then the other thing that I would suggest is continuous communication. Again, coordination with internal partners, because you have different groups that you have to work with within your agency, as well as those external partners. You have to have continuous communication, and usually that communication, since you're dealing with different types of backgrounds, has to be verbal communication versus emails going back and forth. I find the verbal communication to be more successful, so that way questions can be addressed and answered immediately versus through numerous emails.
Thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from the folks in Iowa.
This is Tracy. To address the cooperation, we've had a 20-member steering committee for almost a year now, and that has brought in people from all different aspects of the agency. And what we're doing or trying to do is initiate a culture change across the entire agency, and doing that with all of the planning documents that have been presented through TSMO. Everybody's had a piece of that, and so getting them on the same page really hasn't been a struggle for us, and we're lucky in that we actually have a TSMO budget, and so TSMO projects are just part of that budget. Donna's going to actually talk about a specific document linking the planning and development sides.
Yep, this is Donna. We work very closely also, in addition to the steering committee that Tracy mentioned, we work very closely with our planning department. Our systems planning department developed a tool called ISOPS, which takes into account 13 or 14 different roadway factors, everything from the crashes, the volumes, weather conditions, takes in a wide variety of factors, and we have worked very closely with that tool and with our planning office to help identify which segments of roads do we have the biggest issues on, and why are we seeing those issues. Are they capacity issues? Are they operational issues? What type of issues are we seeing out there? And we are using that information as part of our long-range transportation plan to be able to make better decisions with our funding dollars.
Okay, thank you. Donna and Tracy, let's go down to Solomon in New Jersey.
So as Paul mentioned, we also participate at the state DOT complete team level. There's a group of constituents and stakeholders that represent the complete team. And one hot item that has brought us all together in the last couple of years has been the systems performance measures. And we've taken advantage of that opportunity to work more collaboratively. It's also been an opportunity for us to coordinate with the operating groups within the agencies to try to make that planning connection. So again, the Connected Corridor lays out the ITS architecture and how that supports planning of projects and programs. So strategically, the MPO and JTPA has taken the lead in the initial ITS architecture development, and as part of the Connected Corridor work, we are managing that process, and it brings operating folks and the MPOs together to work more collaboratively. I will not mislead the group and have anyone think that it's been an easy process in terms of collaboration between operations folks and planning people, but it's something we're chipping away at, and we continue to expose one another to what we do for the future.
Thanks, Solomon. Just as a reminder before we move on to Monica, if you guys have any questions anytime during the discussion, by all means place them into the questions pod just right of the presentation or slide. Next up is Monica for a response.
Right, so our relationship of implementing TSMO within planning, or the within planning, is that we recently, within the last 2 years, developed and implemented what is called a corridor sketch initiative, and that is basically just corridor-based planning. However, as opposed to other various corridor-based planning, this one was specifically on mobility and on congested corridors, and it was a TSMO first emphasized planning effort. And so one of the first initial things we did is we went through all of our state routes and defined what is congested, and removed all those that were not defined as congested and kept all those that were considered congested. And then within each of our regions, those corridors that were defined as congested, they had outreach meetings to engage all of the local agencies, transit, any of the partners along those routes, to talk about the mobility issues within that corridor and what it looked like. Again, and it was not a capacity or a lane addition type discussion. It was only looking at TSMO strategies. And moreover, it was looking at what level of maturity operations was within the corridor. So obviously you can imagine some of them were urban or suburban corridors where they did have some operational strategies already in place, and some had none. And so the conversation isn't in a rural area that you go straight to the biggest TSMO strategy that you can. It's laying out that plan of action to get there and starting with some of the most simplest things. Whereas in our urban areas that are highly congested, already implemented, looking at what's the next couple steps to advance TSMO to its full concept within that. And so that has been really an education process. We used our traffic offices to lead the TSMO kind of expertise conversation, but planning led the overall process. And it was a great education process along the way, a lot of lessons learned. The next couple steps for us coming out of that are a couple different things, is how to actually now program those projects, because the projects coming out of there don't fit into our traditional buckets of money or color of money. You know, I'm sure much like other states, we get funding that is mobility driven or safety driven, and so or public transportation driven, and we have strategies that broach all of those. And so how do we combine funding and support the right strategy with the appropriate funding, regardless of where that funding comes from? The other efforts that I'll say the Corridor Sketch Initiative highlighted that we need to work on is, while I said it's a mobility focus, we know that there's a correlation between safety and mobility. And so how do we look at our corridors through the lens of safety, but know that TSMO strategies can improve safety? And so that's the next realm we would like to attack. And then the other one that was highlighted is, if we only focus on congested corridors in a planning phase, how do you capture those corridors that are near or going to be near congestion in the next 5 to 10 years when TSMO is at its most effective? And so how do we develop that into the planning process and balance it with, you know, the long list of unfunded needs? And so those are the planning activities we've been engaged lately.
Monica, we actually got a question from Matthew Miller. The question was, is that non-recurring congestion or both, I guess, for those corridors that you mentioned?
It would be reoccurring congestion, not to get too detailed, but it was, we had to use a measure that was applicable for all state highways, not just ones that had extensive data like in urban areas. And so we used a percentage of the posted speed and then defined how many hours of the day that that speed had to be below the posted speed. And if anyone's interested, I am happy to go through. There's many more steps to the screening process that we could talk about offline.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. Let's get a response to the topic from Kofi.
Yeah, here at the MPO, we the response is very similar to most everyone else at the roundtable. It's pretty much a planning exercise for us when we're facilitating this. I would say working relationship may not be the best word, but more or less philosophy of investigating, exploring where your congested corridors are. And we do that through the congestion management process. We rank the corridors by severity. We use 3 dimensions of congestion: extent, duration, and intensity. And then since we've developed that methodology over time, we've been lucky enough to grab some megadata like INRIX and TomTom or Navtech. And we can visually show throughout the region where some of the bottlenecks are, which automatically suggest operational strategies as being more effective than adding SOV capacity. And so when we do that, we share that with local governments who may not have had that level of detail in terms of the spatial occurrence of congestion. And that sort of helps us, or helps them prioritize strategies and explore strategies that aren't capacity adding. And then recently we've demonstrated time and time again how the cost effectiveness of operational strategies far exceed the benefits or cost effectiveness of capacity projects. They're quicker to implement through the federal PDP, et cetera. And so it's been more or less a culture shift in our region, especially from the local level, on focusing more on operational strategies that way. And so then it becomes more or less a funding conversation as much as it is changing the philosophy and how we battle congestion. And just to give you a highlight, in the last project solicitation that we underwent this year or last year, there were far more roadway operational project requests than there were SOV capacity, simply because of those factors I mentioned earlier, and because the data that we had available, or that they had available, suggested that that might be a better approach for that location. But that is up what I had to say, but I can, of course, answer any more specific questions.
Okay. That came from TxDOT. So, Marco, do you have anything that you need someone to elaborate on?
No, I think that'll work. Thank you.
All right. Kofi, the next topic is yours.
There's so many different questions that we have, but this one is more about how do we leverage TSMO planning to improve accessibility in some of our major activity centers, areas that are sort of more urban, higher density, more uses. How do we leverage TSMO to explore ways to improve that first mile, last mile accessibility for travelers and for goods movement? We're curious to know if anybody has taken a look at TSMO planning from a sort of nodal or sub-area perspective to help with answer that question, especially in light of now the onset of commercial and autonomous vehicles, and then ride sharing, ingress, egress, and those type of topics.
Okay. Let's get a response starting with Marco and TxDOT.
Well, I would say I'm probably not the best person on the call to answer this particular question. my focus here in the Traffic Operations Division is generally on the ITS deployments and supporting the districts in that way. But obviously with TSMO, we start to there's a paradigm shift to start looking at other modes of transportation and some of the non-conventional approaches to solving the congestion issue. So with our TSMO planning initiative, I would say that many things are on the table that weren't on the table before in terms of deployment strategies and types of collaboration that we will engage in. So when I see transit operations, what comes to mind is some of the efforts that we've had with integrated corridor management and mode shifts. And we had a integrated corridor management concept of operations developed for the TxDOT Austin district. And we're at the point now where we're looking at the data needs from the various partners, including our transit agency in Austin, and using that data among all the agencies, including transit, to offer traveler information and help with the decision support. So I know that's not probably not an adequate response. Like I said, probably others could add more value to the response to this question, but that's what I have.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Let's get a response from Paul.
Sure. To touch on from the freight side here, DBRPC, we have a freight department that specifically looks at challenges and opportunities with freight. We have it's called the Philly Freight Finder, which is an open source web app. It's on our website. It provides a space for stakeholders, carriers, and shippers to participate in the planning process, and also helps to identify freight transportation trends and needs within the region. So it's a really great app that provides a lot of information. So it's definitely something to look for on our website. The freight group also has a goods movement task force they facilitate, along with various symposiums they've run. Recently they had a downtown delivery symposium working with Philadelphia, and basically that last mile on how to deliver goods within a city. Freight is also found within our long-range plan. And for congestion, really we're working with our DOTs on kind of pushing new strategies, new ways to combat congestion, so ATM strategies, and PennDOT has a large hard shoulder running project that's coming to I-76 through the Philadelphia region. So there's a lot going on, and a lot that we work with all our stakeholders with.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Natalie.
Yeah, I'll touch on a few things our region's doing, some of which COG is the lead agency and others our partner agencies are the lead agencies on. So related to kind of freight activities and ITS or TSMO type of things, a few things we've started to look into a little further related to freight is railroad crossing blockages and how we identify those. We have one corridor in which the frontage roads along a toll road are blocked by freight rails on a frequent basis, and so we want to notify people to not get off that facility, or at least tell them that that crossing is blocked. So we're looking for innovative ways to get that data out to the travelers on the system so they can stay on the limited access facility versus get off on the frontage road and get stuck behind freight rails, because it's really close to a rail yard, and so a lot of trains sit there for quite a while in order to change those goods. So that's one thing that we've started to look at, and we have a specific case in which we're going to try to apply that application. We've also talked with freight folks about wait times at freight yards. So as they go in, I guess sometimes trucks have to sit there for quite a while. They idle. It would be nice to be able to share that information with those particular types of freight trucks so that they don't have to wait there as long, or maybe they delay their arrival. So that's another strategy that we've been looking at in terms of freight. In terms of transit operations, we have a group within our department that deals with transit operations, and really the big thing that we've been looking at on the first mile and last mile is that mobility on demand, and how do we integrate that into our transit stations and stops to get people to and from those the last mile or the last 3 miles, the close proximity enough to take the transit line, but they can't get that last 3 miles. It's not practical for them to walk that. And we also have some work that we're doing with DART has really taken the lead on some mobility on demand applications. The Dallas Area Rapid Transit, as well as the City of Arlington, has implemented a mobility type on demand system within its jurisdiction. It's testing a few things out. So those are some pilots that we have going on within our region that look at best practices. We hope to learn from these and see how they could be applied to other areas within our region and just take those lessons learned and apply them appropriately. We also have carpooling and ride-sharing apps that we use to try to match folks up to get people from out of their cars in terms of driving by themselves to and from locations. And bike sharing programs is another pilot that we have within our region, within a couple of the jurisdictions that we have. So those are some of the things that we're starting to look into, but again, a lot of these are pilots. So hopefully, over time, we'll have some good lessons learned from these pilots as we begin to implement them.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from Iowa DOT.
Okay, as far as the freight goes, our congestion typically comes since we're a rural state and we don't have a lot of the high activity areas that the metropolitan areas, larger metropolitan areas have, our congestion typically comes with construction zones. 6 of our 10 top congested areas are due to construction. And so our ITS strategies of getting the information out on a specific trucker version of our 511, using the DMS boards, using some variable speed limits, and those types of things are helping in those congestion areas. As far as the first mile, last mile on transit, again, we don't have a large group of metropolitan areas, but we do have some issues with rural folks who don't have access to transit at all. And, Uber and Lyft are great in cities where they operate, but in our rural areas, they don't really, they're not really an option. And so we do have a website now that we launched this past year to match rides up with people needing rides, and that has been pretty popular. Donna, you want to? Oh, yeah, and we're also in the middle of a regional truck parking study where we're going to use the ITS applications to provide either to an app or we're probably not going to do signs, but we're looking at different options to let truckers know where available parking is, especially now with the ELDs, where, they're shut down an hour after their notification. Every few minutes is going to count for them to be able to find parking. So that's kind of our focus right now.
Okay, thanks, Iowa. Let's get a response from New Jersey. Solomon?
Okay, so I'll start with freight also. We have a freight initiatives group here at the MPO, and we tackle some of the regional freight issues. We have the 3rd largest port in the nation, Port Newark, New York, and we work with the Port Authority and some of the other agencies to look at intermodal issues affecting the region. More specific to TSMO, we are looking at performance measures and the impact of an appointment system that was put in for Port Newark to deal with the idling times and the potential or future arrival of the post-Panama ships and the volume increase. So that has been quite a success in terms of the impacts locally, and we want to see how, from a performance management standpoint, we promote this type of solution. We also, from a first mile, last mile standpoint, we manage or administrate over the TMAs, the TDM transportation management associations in New Jersey. So some of them have partnered with Lyft and Uber for looking at priority, first mile, last mile, access to employers and employment centers. We are working with Uber and Lyft to get the word out about opportunities in some of the smaller towns to get people to and from transit centers. We recently participated in a workshop sponsored by FHWA, New Jersey Department of Transportation, where Bob Sheehan and Jim Hunt came up to discuss mobility on demand in TSMO, and we used some of those examples, TDM examples. So we're trying to incorporate more of the first mile, last mile solutions and working with these private TCNs or TNCs. And finally, as part of our TSMO plan, we're looking to advance the ICM study that we produced for the Northeast Corridor to and from the New York City nodes. So that's something that we're developing and advancing and trying to program for moving forward. So I hope that provided some insights into what we're doing.
Thanks, Solomon. Let's move to Monica in Washington.
Yeah, so that's something that we've been wrestling a lot with in our planning process, is how to address that first mile, last mile. I'll give you two examples and then kind of some overall work that we're doing in the agency to help address that. We have two things similar to like what Natalie was saying, some pilot projects. The first one is called Challenge Seattle, and it's led by our former governor in partnership with some major corporations like Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing that are located in the Seattle area and have a great interest to help travel there be more reliable for their staff as well as their freight and business movement. And the Challenge Seattle, I should say, has other emphasis areas, but I'm just speaking to the transportation portion of the challenge. And so DOT is participating in this. We're not leading it, but it is a coordinated effort between the businesses, the local MPO in Seattle, the city of Seattle, as well as other local agencies there. And they're really they're focusing on reliability. And while that focus is on reliability, not necessarily specifically the first mile, last mile, you have to look at those as well to get total reliability. And so it is primarily a technology focus, so they're looking at data and how to use data to give people the information they need to make a travel choice, whether it's what mode of travel they take, what route they take, or whether they just choose not to go at all. And so that comes with also those corporations looking at their policies as to how to staff their companies in the Seattle area. And so I think that is not necessarily emphasizing first mile, last mile, but it is definitely a good example of all of that being talked about in the bigger transportation picture. The second one that I think really is a good illustration of something our DOT did take the lead on, it was called the Linwood Multimodal Center. It was a pilot study. And it was a bus terminal that they were looking to remodel or add on to truly make it a multimodal center, so to have connectivity between the various modes that were separated quite a ways away and made multimodal travel not very possible for the average person. And so it was a pilot study, and one of the, I think, unique things about this study was that it used performance measures to drive the focus of the study, and the measure, the primary focus was accessibility. So how far is a transit stop? How far is the next mode of transportation? And how to bring that measure to an acceptable level that people would actually use those other forms for a total travel option. And that being said, That work, that pilot study, has added to a conversation and work effort that's been going on in our agency, and that is to develop an overall performance framework that is used from the initial in planning and carried through the life of a project. And so it would be setting performance targets for strategies that need to be met by the ultimate strategy selected, and then that metric would be measured as the project was constructed and operated, and that is a very large work effort in our agency, and it's been a roller coaster ride, but it's one that we feel needs to be done to really help further TSMO in the agency. So.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Kofi, did you get everything that you needed? Do you need someone to elaborate?
No, we got everything. In a future roundtable, we might get at the sort of the conflict between like freight accessibility, last mile delivery, and last mile for everybody else in certain activity centers. That'd be something we're interested in hearing, what other places are doing. But these were good responses, very helpful.
Okay, thanks, Kofi. All right, the next question is from Mohammed Well. This question is one of the questions we did not get to during part one. It was in the chat pod, and this question pertains to funding. I was going to skip across it, but because it was funding, I wanted to kind of cover it, and I think I've heard responses to this already, but the question is to all, discuss, explain how do you plan for / manage sources and use of funds when considering TSMO. I thought this was important to kind of point this out because what we were finding out during the CMM workshops is that when it comes to construction, maintenance, and safety in the federal aid program especially, all of those type projects fall real nicely into the federal aid bucket. But when it comes to TSMO, TSMO is a different animal. So I'm going to throw this out to you guys, starting with Marco and coming around the room to see what your responses are.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. The question of funding comes up quite a bit, and at TxDOT, I mean, we have started to focus on this in terms of prioritizing funding because there's limited funding, and the funding that would go to support ITS and signals or the maintenance of those will come from the same maintenance budget that's used for other roadway-related maintenance needs, such as pavement. And so there's a high degree of competition, and so that is a challenge. Now there are other categories. There are a handful of categories that could fund TSMO related projects, but again, there's competition, and it may not necessarily be the same amount of funding overall that's in the maintenance bucket of funds. At TxDOT, TxDOT administration has asked each of starting first with the 5 metro districts, to provide a semi-annual report of the level of traffic management system completion on system roadways. So that is the CCTV camera coverage, DMS sign coverage, and communications, and identify where those gaps exist, and identify projects that will be in a unified transportation program plan to fill in those traffic management systems gaps with the devices that I just mentioned. And this would require some early planning from the districts to prioritize those, and that is with full consideration of the constraints that I mentioned. So this really comes down to shifting priority in a way. And I think priorities, I think many of the existing priorities, you know, I think they stay the same, but I think it just really comes down to the planning and the collaboration that's needed, and that the cultural shift in terms of the importance of management and operations. So that's what we're doing. I mean, I know that's, again, it's never really I think the response that many of our stakeholders around the state or in the districts are looking for when the topic, the question of funding comes up. But that's where we stand. And then I also refer to some examples in forums like this where agencies mention, you know, innovative ways that they found funding by working with their partner agencies and things of that sort. But we would like to get to a point where there's this sort of a dedicated, clean TSMO bucket of funding. I think that's kind of the dream that many of us have. But that's my response there.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Let's get a response from Paul.
Sure. Much like Marco said, that funding stream, that long-range funding stream, really comes in a change of culture down the line to get dedicated funding to TSMO. So I'm going to kind of touch on a few things just within BBRPC that we found that we need to kind of take existing funding and kind of craft our project so that you can kind of shoehorn it into existing funding and make it work that way, at least in the short term, till that culture shift happens and TSMO is really funded. Through that, we've gotten our signal retiming program here in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. It's about $750,000 a year for just signal retiming, and that's 100% CMAQ funded, which is great. And we're also trying to get some funding for our incident management task forces also through CMAQ. So we're trying to craft some grant writing, some project proposals into that CMAQ language so we can get that funding. So for us, really, in the short term, it's taking your projects, crafting them into ways that you can use existing funding until those regular funding streams come down the line.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Let's get a response from Natalie.
Yeah, within the Dallas-Fort Worth region, we really look at, primarily through our agency, 3 different funding sources that we can use for TSMO. One is the CMAQ, which Paul alluded to, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality. The other is we get Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funds. That's eligible for TSMO type activity. And then we also have some local funds that we're able to put into TSMO. The challenge that we find with getting the funding set aside is TSMO projects are usually low cost and quick to implement. Many times it takes us more time just to get our project put in our funding document, our Transportation Improvement Program, and getting an agreement in place. As it takes us longer to do that than to actually implement the project. So the timeliness of the process that we have to gain access to those funds is constrained. And so that's something that, you know, we continue to bring up, and hopefully eventually we can get to a point where they're not quite as constrained as other types of funding categories. Local funds, obviously we can use those as quickly as we identify a project that we want to use them for, but the federal funds have a lot of strings attached to them in which you have to go through a lengthy process. The other approach that we've taken is if a corridor is undergoing a major reconstruction, we require that TSMO activities and projects be part of that. Now, sometimes we start out with those in the project, but then as it moves into construction and other things start to cost more, we have found that some of those things drop off, and we're not necessarily notified that those TSMO types of projects drop off, those big projects, until it's after the fact and the decision's already been made. And so that's an approach that we do have a policy for, but how we enforce the policy, our hands are tied to some extent, because once an agreement is set up with the state, the MPO has no leverage to go back and take money off that project. But so that's an obstacle that we still have to face.
Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from the folks at Iowa DOT.
In Iowa, I would say we are very fortunate. We have a very high support from our upper management, and when our strategic plan and program plans were developed about 2 years ago now, They identified a TSMO budget in those plans, and that was approved by our management. So we are very fortunate that we have a set-aside budget for TSMO activities. A lot of that does include our operation of our TMC center, all of our ITS elements, but we have that set aside, which, again, we feel very fortunate about. We have also, similar to what Natalie just indicated with our construction projects, we've kind of had a culture shift over the last 6 to 12 months where we finally have acknowledgement that the ITS elements really are part of a construction project. So those are now being considered earlier in the development of our projects and are being considered as part of the cost of building that project. We do have some where, yes, like Natalie indicated, it's the low-cost items, so people tend to want to get rid of those. But we're working through that culture shift to try to maintain that and continue to integrate that into our development process so that we've got TSMO integrated from the planning all the way through construction.
Okay, thank you. Solomon, let's get a response from you guys in New Jersey.
So I'll be brief. As the MPO, we pass through money to our local constituents and Newark and Jersey City, and as part of that, we're trying to expose them more to TSMO and opportunities to take advantage of these low-hanging fruit for signalization, et cetera. With the DOT, I can't speak on their behalf, but they are doing much of what you're hearing around the table as it relates to the project pipeline, incorporating TSMO into projects such that you have ITS components and management of same. So the state of good repair is a priority for the state of New Jersey, and TSMO is or ITS is a very small percentage of that, and the more exposure we have, the better it comes to design and incorporating TSMO projects. So the funding is very low, competitively speaking, but we're trying to impact that.
Okay. Thanks, Solomon. Let's get a response from Monica in Washington DOT.
So I think much like the other states, we do have a dedicated TSMO, or what we would really call a traffic operations funding stream, and it is segmented up into all those typical things like ITS and IRT and all those things. And then we have other funding mechanisms that add to our systems, such as projects might arise through our mobility or safety programs, and that's traditional to all of us. Unfortunately, we have recognized that really pits things within a bucket, say like a mobility project against a mobility project. So it's project versus a project, as opposed to strategy versus a strategy. And that became about from our corridor sketch initiative. And so we are really looking to kind of have a paradigm shift in our agency. And as I mentioned, we've gone through the corridor sketch initiative, and we have strategies that are coming out of these corridors. And we want to prioritize corridors, and then within a corridor, prioritize the strategies within it and have an implementation plan. And that is regardless of what the strategy is. And so, for example, a strategy might come out that it's to add traveler information to a rural corridor. And then we would go seek the funds to fund that, as opposed to another corridor where it might be additional transit services. And then we would need to go to our public transportation that manages those funds. And so, first of all, our definition of TSMO is really trying to focus on that bigger, not just corridor management, but travel demand management and planning policy and access management and those things. And when you look at that bigger one, our typical funding schemes don't work to go in and prioritize projects within a funding mechanism. We have to look at the strategies first, and then they find the appropriate funding. And so we know that's true, but right now we're working through the very complicated details of changing that funding procedures, and which are very regimented and long established in our agency, and we are like literally in the middle of that right now.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Let's get a response from ARC Kofi.
Yeah, there's two answers. The
At the MPO level, we don't set aside or have a bucket for operational improvements or ITS projects, but we do emphasize that as one of the project types I alluded to earlier during our solicitation for ST, and CMAQ funds. But on the flip side, GDOT, Georgia DOT, sets aside in sort of like a lump sum format every year for the Metro Atlanta area. They set aside millions of dollars using NHS or NHPP funding, and to a smaller degree, CMAQ, I believe. I might be mistaken on that. But they set aside a larger amount of funding for similar projects, but specifically for traffic signal upgrades throughout the region that are GDOT maintained mostly, and then also for ITS expansion as well. And these are all separate from like any typical maintenance set-asides or anything like that they would use federal funds for.
Okay. Thanks, Kofi. We're going to push along to the next topic. Marco, just as a heads up, your topic for TxDOT is a repeat of the first, so we're going to pull your topic from the next slide. So with that, the next topic will come from New Jersey. Just wanted to give Marco a heads up.
And Daniel, consistent with that, you might notice or hear similar theme in my next question. So if folks want to move beyond this, that's fine. So I'll jump right in. Have states developed compelling TSMO business cases for local, state, and especially federal level executive leadership that have led to redirecting of funds? If so, with what quantifiable success or the percentage of capital funding? So again, we are in the process of advancing our the Connected Corridor plan, and we are currently looking to make the business case. So we've identified 3 strategies, one being ICM, transit signal priority, and integration of CAD with our operating software to make the benefit cost case and try to use that as an example for TSMO opportunities in the state. So one challenge has been, again, the percentage of TSMO, dedicated TSMO funds at the DOT and throughout the state has been very small as part of the capital program. And we are, of course, taking advantage of grant opportunities and other opportunities, but this business case will be completed in June, and we're getting a lot of good headway for that plan. So just asking if others have a business case, and I think I've heard from many in the group that this is ongoing work.
Okay. Let's start with Monica and go around. Monica, you may be on mute.
As far as like the bigger TSMO business case, we have not specifically done any development of targeting for that. We do that at various specific program levels, such as incident response. You know, we often are updating our legislature and giving them information as to the effectiveness of the program just in general, as well as when we're asking for increases in the program. Also, we have a program that's called low-cost enhancements, which looks for those minor operational improvements, which we consider to be part of the TSMO suite of strategies. And we found that to be a very effective business case to present because, you know, doubling or tripling its budget is like peanuts to the legislature, but allows us to pick up a lot of those low-hanging fruits, as was just mentioned. So, thank you.
All right, thanks, Monica. Let's get a response from Kofi.
The one documented business case that has happened in the Atlanta region so far has been related to traffic incident management, where for a specific program called the TRIP. It's basically an incentivized program for towers, wreckers to respond to heavy-duty incidents. It was originally funded with CMAQ, and there was a report, an after study done that showed that it had an 11-to-1 benefit in terms of reducing the cost of the incentive was an 11-to-1 benefit over the cost of non-recurring congestion resulting from those incidents. And so that led to a sustained pot of funding to continue that incentive. Again, the name of the program is TRIP, Towing Recovery Incentive Program. GDOT maintains and manages that and has done a fabulous job of keeping that going. As it relates to other strategies, those are more or less on a case-by-case basis where we may have shown for a particular location that an operational project may have a better cost effectiveness than a capacity project, but on a programmatic level, like for general recurring congestion or commuter delay, we've not documented that to the extent that it's been documented for incident management or incident response.
All right. Thanks, Kofi. Let's move to Marco at TxDOT.
Okay, so for far as a business case to redirect funding or for executive leadership, I would have to refer to the research that was done. There was a firm that did some research that really, I think, created some momentum around, some renewed momentum around traffic management systems, and quite honestly, led to much of the support and recognition for TSMO around the state. And so that research was conducted over a 2-year period of time, and what it demonstrated was the importance of traffic management systems, looking at other states, how other states are applying TSMO-related activities, and essentially made a business case for the return on investment. And also, it involved going out to the districts and looking at some of the district needs, and districts identified they needed opportunities for collaboration and cross-district problem solving and technology needs, such as common technology platforms across the state for areas such as asset management and network monitoring and video sharing. And that led to the TxDOT administration allocating funding to one of the districts. That district is the Austin district, and they serve as they're serving currently as our pilot district for a TSMO program plan, but they also have served as a pilot for some enhanced traffic management system investment. And that particular funding, I don't think it was from one of the typical or conventional categories of fundings that districts can rely on. It was a discretionary allocation from TxDOT administration. But as we move forward, obviously we have to show, demonstrate results. And Austin District is one of the districts that there is some focus on, here in Texas. I think I answered most of that question. So that's what I have for that one.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Let's get a response from Paul.
Okay. I can't say that we've done much in that aspect of developing a business case. We have worked with PennDOT and touched base with them on their TSMO strategic plan, which they're working on. So hopefully once that's completed and goes through everything, that starts changing the mindset, starts changing the culture, and funds start being redirected for TSMO use. But that's about all I have.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Let's get a response from North Texas Council with Natalie.
Yeah, really what we use to sell the business case is, again, looking at our long-range transportation plan, as well as what some other folks had mentioned, their congestion management process. because again, we prioritize TSMO to come at the top before we do any type of capacity improvements in our long-range transportation plan. And so we get to prioritize that a little higher than all the other types of capital improvement projects. The other thing is when we go through our congestion management process, again, TSMO is the first thing we look at. We don't want to add more pavement to the road unless we absolutely have to. So we utilize that process to identify that TSMO can have a benefit and maybe solve all the problems before you have to add additional pavement out there. So we really utilize those two initiatives to continue to push and try to get funding for TSMO. So there are existing documents, existing federal required processes that the Metropolitan Planning Organization needs to do, and we just put TSMO as a priority within those documents. Now, based on that, I went back and kind of looked at some of the funding that's allocated to TSMO type projects, and right now we range from about 5 to 10% per year depending on what projects are being implemented for that given year. It's not a huge amount, but again, TSMO type projects are less expensive than those capital improvements, but I still think there's probably room for us to grow in terms of the percentage that's allocated to TSMO.
Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from the folks in Iowa.
Yeah, this is Tracy, and we're in a very similar situation to what Natalie was just describing, in that TSMO comes in at the very early processes, and so it just becomes part of the project. As far as the business case buy-in, our initial strategic plan, we included all the MPOs, RPAs, cities and counties in those initial discussions. But right now, our focus is on the culture shift within the agency, and then we plan to filter that to our partners out in the field after we've got the agency all on board. And as far as the quantifiable success on percentage, our TSMO budget is around, as Natalie was saying, 5-6% of the overall.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. It sounds like the folks at the North Texas Council of Governments and Iowa DOT are taking somewhat of a TSMO first approach. I've heard that term a few times out west. Apparently, it's gaining more momentum. However, I obviously support that type of thinking, but it's a very interesting approach. First off, Solomon, did you get everything that you needed? Do you need someone to elaborate on anything?
I did, and I really appreciate Marco and his Austin example. It seems as though there's discretionary funding being set aside for looking at TSMO's potential in Austin, which is very interesting. And I appreciate the honesty and everyone sharing. This is probably a lead-in to another question, so I'll just throw it out there. But it's one thing for consideration as connected and autonomous vehicles comes online, the potential impact that has on TSMO and our budgets. But I know there's a question focused on CAV, so I'll stand by.
Okay. Thanks, Solomon. We do have one question in the chat pod from Russell Allen of Florida DOT. And the question is, do you have any strategies in place to identify potential capacity benefits of TSMO or ITS deployment? We'll start with Marco and work our way around the room.
Daniel, could you repeat that question? I'm looking in the chat box. I don't see it. So if you could repeat that question, I'd appreciate it.
No problem. Russell Allen, Florida DOT. Do you have any strategies in place to identify potential capacity benefits of TSMO or ITS deployments?
Well, it's I feel like I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but we do have again, I think it really goes for us, or at least from my perspective, working in a division, I see things as taking place within the individual districts that have some level of autonomy. So I look at, again, I refer back to the Austin district. Austin is the capital of Texas. That's the division offices are in Austin. Austin also happens to be one of the districts. Austin and the surrounding areas happens to be one of the districts. And so in the Austin area, I mentioned earlier integrated corridor management as one particular mobility strategy that is under review. And I believe strategies such as integrated corridor management, which are very comprehensive, they come with significant challenges, but also some opportunities to showcase the effectiveness of the different aspects of TSMO and how effective it could be in managing congestion. I think traffic incident management. I mean, that's just a comprehensive TSMO strategy, and it covers so many aspects of TSMO, from the collaboration and the necessary standard operating procedures that need to be put in place. I think from looking at your capabilities in those areas, you end up identifying certain needs, and some of those needs are technology-based. You find you may need to deploy traffic cameras in a certain area in order to better detect and respond to incidents, or service patrol to help clear incidents. So I think from my standpoint, from the division, I have such a broad view of things, but those are just some examples of the mobility strategies that you can look into that end up driving you toward certain technology improvements.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Paul had to drop off, so we're going to go to Natalie for a response.
Yeah, in terms of any quantifiable benefits that we could compare against capacity type projects that we've used in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I mean, we've looked at different types of things like person hours saved. Person throughput is something that we've tried to calculate. So then again, if you're looking at the type of TSMO type strategies that increase auto occupancy, we could look at more people are getting through that corridor. We've also looked at travel time benefits. So when we do like traffic signal retiming along corridors, we do collect before and after studies on the travel time along that and looking at delay. And then the other thing we've looked at is the speeds before and after we implement different type of technology strategies and try to quantify a benefit based on the speeds along a particular corridor. And those are the types of performance measures we've looked at.
Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from the folks in Iowa.
Again, we're on a very similar page with Natalie and what they're doing in Dallas-Fort Worth. Different studies as far as the before and after speeds and the timing of incident clearance, those types of things. So yeah, really about the same strategies that Natalie has identified.
Okay. Thanks, Iowa. Let's get a response from Solomon in New Jersey.
I will also echo Natalie and Iowa and some of the before and after studies relative to travel time, speeds. We have a construction project, a major capital construction projects where the TMP plan included full closure of eastbound traffic into New York or towards New York, and we implemented a managed lane. And when I say we, New Jersey or NJDOT with our turnpike, and that managed lane was able to handle the additional volume. And without some of our data, our real-time data tools, and an open reach system, which our agency called Transcom has enabled, we probably would not have been able to do this type of major capital improvement project. So it's been about 3 years running, and it's been a huge success. So adaptive signals is something we focused on in New Jersey, and that program has funding wise improved about 5-fold. So adaptive signals are becoming a major staple here. And, we are taking advantage of the data that we have for evaluation given all the activities in this region. So hope that helps.
Okay. Thanks, Solomon. Let's get a response from Monaco.
So much like what everyone else has said, we primarily focus on studying the amount of delay within a corridor as well as travel time reliability. And those are reported annually in our corridor capacity report. We also do before and after studies specific to corridors, and we highlight those as well in our corridor capacity report. And we are wanting to focus specifically on person throughput for tracking and monitoring capacity improvements to a corridor. And of course, as everyone knows, that has some challenges in terms of how to actually collect that. And we were just awarded a $2 million grant to implement some technology on one of our interstates to track both HOV and general purpose lanes. And so we'll be looking to that pilot project to see how going forward we can further that measure of truly seeing how capacity is improved. Because without looking at person throughput, latent demand, doesn't show a lot in terms of improvement of some of the other measures like delay and travel time reliability.
Okay, thanks, Monica. Let's get a response from Kofi.
Nothing additional to add from compared to the other respondents. Typical before and after studies. I guess the nuance might be in like the methodology and the tools that we use, and we've started to use mesoscopic modeling as a way to demonstrate the comparison of improvements between a TSMO project and a capacity project as it relates to delay. Typically, because all we had in the past was a regional travel demand model, and those don't capture benefits very well. And if we try to, they're not as accurate or as easily bought in by the general public. So we've been working with a specific software called vZoom that helps us integrate travel demand model, regional travel demand model patterns to. We use that as a seed to help simulate traffic at an intersection level, for example, or even a corridor level. And we can show the amount of vehicle delay reduced or intersection level service improvements.
Okay. Thanks, Kofi. We're at the 30-minute mark in terms of the remainder of this particular roundtable. So what I'm going to do is let you guys, kind of pick your hot topic in terms of what's most important to you as opposed to following the slide presentation. Next up is TxDOT. As I mentioned before, Marco, this is a repeat of the first. I think you have two that are left on the next two slides. So take your pick.
Okay, let me take a look at those slides. I did print them out, but one of the things I would like to, and did you? Okay, you moved to the, okay. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the questions I had, it was when looking at the Iowa DOT plan, and there was I believe there's a table there that mentions, and this question could go out to the other panelists as well as Iowa DOT, but it talked about integrating TSMO into the department's design manuals, and that is, I see as being a next phase of our statewide TSMO effort. And we've already here at TxDOT, we've developed a statewide TSMO strategic plan, which defines an engagement plan to keep the districts engaged in TSMO and establish TSMO leaders in the districts and specific actions that need to be taken from the division level and specific actions that the districts need to take. But one of the things that I believe is the next step in advancing TSMO is to further integrate it into more of the processes, particularly the design manual. So I just wanted to hear more about that and the process and the status of that.
Since that question was kind of pointed towards Iowa initially, let's let Iowa respond first.
Okay, this is Donna. This is an initiative that we are just kicking off the ground right now. It is something we've talked about. We obviously want to integrate TSMO from the early planning phases all the way through the design phase and into construction. One of our ways to do that is to try to get some new chapters written for our design manual. We have a subcommittee that's formed under our overall steering committee that Tracy mentioned earlier. That subcommittee is tasked with trying to figure out how do we integrate this into our design manual. We want to make sure, again, like I said, that we hit everything from the planning early phases, and then what types of analysis need to be done throughout the project development process. So it's an initiative that unfortunately we have not gotten off the ground yet, but within the next couple weeks we are having some meetings to discuss how do we move forward with this, what type of analysis needs to be done, what resources do we need to accomplish this. In-house staff, we're probably not going to be developing this on our own. We are probably going to be reaching out to our consultant partners to help us develop this. But we are definitely, this is one of our top priorities over the next probably 6 to 8 months to really get this moving.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Iowa. Let's see whether or not any of the other agencies have a best practice as it pertains to integrating TSMO concepts and principles into design or design manuals. Let's start with you, Natalie, if you have some type of best practice that you want to share as far as integrating TSMO.
As an MPO, we don't deal necessarily that much with design manuals other than what TxDOT sets for us. But I do have an ask, since you brought it up, if there's a way to incorporate operations staff, first responders, and planners in the design effort somehow. I think that would definitely be allow us to design our technology and roadway projects more efficiently the first time around, so we don't have to go back and retrofit them.
Okay. You said that was an ask, so are you throwing that out to Monaco or to
I'm asking, I guess, any folks that develop design manuals to possibly include that.
Duly noted, Natalie.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's jump down to Solomon and Monica and Kofi in terms of any best practices that you guys may have.
So as an MPO, this is Solomon, NJTPA, we don't necessarily get very so much involved in the design and design manuals at the state or agency levels. However, in my past experience at the Turnpike Authority, we did solidify or include construction intelligence ITS equipment into construction projects that potentially impacted roadway delay, created roadway delay, made sure that ITS was included in those packages by way of the specs. So I don't have much to offer along this line.
All right, let's get a response from Washington DOT, Monica.
So we have not really approached this topic, and probably for a couple different reasons. Our design of traffic operations related work is primarily done within our traffic offices. It's not done in our mainstream design offices. And so for that matter, the expertise is already there. The people believe in TSMO, and so it's, we just are able to maintain our traffic manual and consider that to I think incorporate the aspects that are important to this question that is being brought up. That being said, we do recognize that there are times that ITS is not the sole purpose of the project. It might be like an add-on to the project. And even though the design would be retained to be done in a traffic office, the overall management of the project would be by a design office. And many times it's treated like it's kind of the icing on the cake, and sometimes the cake doesn't get iced. And so that's more of a culture thing in design that we recognize needs to be addressed, that not only paving the road and putting the striping down, but maintaining the overall budget for the ITS is just as important. And so that seems to be more of where we're working with design, just because of the way we're organized, that the design is retained in our traffic offices.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. Kofi, I was wondering if you guys had a response or some experience with this at ARC.
No, not at ARC, but Georgia DOT does have a design manual for ATMS specifically, but it's written specifically for their own Georgia Navigator projects mostly. It's not, may not necessarily be something a local government could rely on completely for their projects, and it goes into great amount of detail on all the different components for, you know, a regional freeway ATMS. So I won't go over all the contents, but they do have one that was revised in 2013.
Okay. Thanks, Kofi. Marco, did you get everything that you needed? Need someone to elaborate on anything, or?
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Again, kind of leaving it open to you guys to pick your hottest topic, you know, moving forward, being that we're about to close this out in about 19 minutes. Kofi, ARC, you're up.
Yeah, I think the last two hot items that we had, one is relating to connected autonomous vehicle, and the other one is ITS for transit. So I'm curious about any folks around the roundtable that have any examples of transit for ITS. I heard some previously, but maybe some folks can go into a little more detail on transit ITS.
Okay, let's start with Marco with TxDOT.
So I don't know if anyone noticed, but I answered this question earlier when I should have answered one about freight. I guess I answered the question I wish I had been asked. But in all honesty, when I did answer this question, I had mentioned that I wasn't the best to answer it. But again, transit operations, you know, in Austin District, we plan to incorporate that or consider that in the TSMO program plan for the Austin District. In one of our recent outreach events, the Austin District attended, and we were discussing the goals and the vision for the TSMO plan. In Austin, in the city of Austin, was there, and one of the things that they mentioned as a priority is that whatever plan we put in place, it must include transit. Now, what exactly will that be? What type of projects will fall out of that? That remains to be seen. But earlier I had referenced some of the collaboration that has taken place between TxDOT here in the Austin District and the local transit authority, Capital Metro, you know, in the context of the integrated corridor management concept operations that's being developed. And that just involves the type of data sharing that will take place, the types of data that the various agencies will share and use in order to manage the corridor and provide information to the public.
Okay. Thanks, Marco. Natalie, get a response from you guys.
Yeah, I mentioned before that we have some agencies within our region that are implementing mobility on demand solutions, one of which is our transit agency, the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, and they're really looking at mobility on demand as a last mile or last 3 mile type of connection from their rail stops. And then the city of Arlington has actually implemented a pilot using mobility on demand because they currently do not have transit service within their jurisdiction. And so this is a supplemental type service to see if they can utilize it to get folks around within their city. Other types of transit-related ITS components that that have been looked at within our region and implemented is looking at like next train arrival information, so they're able to track when vehicles are arriving and display that at the rail stations. There also was some work done with our integrated corridor management project along 75, in which we are looking at ways to display travel time if you take transit versus travel time if you drive along that corridor, to help to promote folks to maybe take transit to and from their destination if it meets their origin and destination as part of that activity. As well as parking at those rail stations. I think that's a big concern quite a few metropolitan areas have, is parking availability of folks when they get to the station to actually get on the rail. Is there parking available? You hate to have them get off the freeway and go and try to park at a station where no parking's available. It just makes everybody a little more frustrated with the whole process. So that was another item that we looked at from a transit perspective in ITS.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from Iowa DOT.
We kind of followed Marco's lead and talked about this a little bit in that freight question, but our biggest push this past year at least has been our website, our rideshare website. As far as ITS practices, we don't really have a ton going on. Our transit is a fairly small element in our whole transportation system. So I guess I would just leave it there.
Okay. Thank you. Solomon, let's get a response from New Jersey.
Okay, in central and northern New Jersey, we're very heavily transit dependent, and Transcom is an organization made up of 16 tri-state agencies, operating agencies, and their software or core software that integrates all of the agency information is called OpenReach. As of recent, the OpenReach system now includes GTSS bus and rail data. So on a map, you have aggregate transit, roadway, rail, bus information in one place. And that supports 511 in New Jersey, also in New York. So we are starting to embrace the idea of transit and this integrated system approach. We also have 2 ICM grant studies in our region, one in New York from New Jersey into New York and another in New Jersey. So that OpenReach system would support a DSS system. Also, we are trying to change minds and behavior around who's a part of TSMO, so i.e. ITS strategies like transit signal priority is being evaluated, and transit's becoming one of our partners. Our TSMO plan has transit at the table, so that approach to TSMO is encompassing transit. And at the MPO, we manage the New Jersey Rideshare and TDM program here with our Transportation Management Associations. And we are obviously, as I mentioned earlier, working with Lyft and Uber, and just trying to expand what accessibility and transportation TSMO represents. So
Okay,
I hope that
thank you.
helps you there. Okay.
Thanks, Solomon. Let's get a response from Monica.
So we've kind of been wrestling a little bit over what exactly this question is looking for. I'll just admit I'm not sure I totally understand what ITS best practices are, but I guess I can explain how we understand transit to be part of the TSMO process or TSMO consideration. So we have chosen to define TSMO as kind of like a 4-pronged thing, and I think part of that is all of the traditional ITS strategies that we've been talking about, but also more of like traditional traffic engineering things that we do, like signal timing and minor operational improvements. Also planning strategies, so working with local agencies to use their networks, their arterials to help relieve congestion off of state highways, and use capacity where it's still available, and then certainly travel demand management, and I think that's where transit comes in for us. And so when we are in the corridor sketch or corridor planning process, all 4 of those prongs are considered, and transit is absolutely part of that. And so what that has looked like for us is, is it increasing a park and ride? Is it adding a park and ride? Is it adding another service layer to a transit operator? Is it doing data sharing among DOTs and local agencies and transit authorities for traveler information? Those are the type of transit strategies that we've been looking at, and that is happening at our planning level.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. Kofi, did you get everything that you needed, or do you need someone to elaborate on something?
Yes, indeed. I got what I needed. Thanks.
All right. I'm going to pause here for a second to see whether or not anyone in the audience has a question or a comment that they want to make at this time. I don't see anything in the chat pod or question pod, but I wanted to see whether or not anyone wanted to pipe up. Okay, with that being said, well, hearing nothing. Solomon, you're up with what would be the last topic that's most important to you.
Okay, so I'll throw this out to the group. What role does TSMO play in the CAV discussion, or rather, what part have you been in your agency's evaluation or discussions around connected and autonomous vehicles?
Okay, we will start with Monica. Monica, you may be on mute.
Sorry about that. We are kind of just really entering the CAV arena. We've been watching and monitoring and listening and somewhat participating, but just recently made an active action to engage and basically created its own program within our agency. As far as how we think it relates to TSMO, we would consider it a strategy within TSMO. And so as it develops and education about it grows and what it actually means and what the implementation of it is, it will be considered just as any other TSMO strategy. So I think that's our point of view on it.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. Let's get a response from ARC. Kofi.
Yeah, we're in the same boat as Solomon, wondering what other folks, how they may be taking current TSMO planning efforts, taking CAV into account. I don't know if it's developing CONOPS for particular use cases, or maybe it's trying to prioritize within your region where it's best to start deploying connected and autonomous vehicles. But we're struggling with that as well, and I really don't have a articulate response.
Okay, thanks, Kofi. Let's get a response from TxDOT. Marco.
So here at TxDOT, here in the traffic management section of the Traffic Operations Division, we are the group within TxDOT that has been leading the statewide TSMO initiative. And our group is also the group that is really leading or the point of contact with most things related to connected autonomous vehicles, at least from TxDOT's standpoint, as far as our involvement, with the National Pool Fund studies and so forth. So because of that, I think naturally there's certainly a connection, or we see that connection, and we're organized in such a way that connected autonomous vehicles, will play a large role in how we advance TSMO. I think when you think about connected autonomous vehicles and I would say the number one I guess, rationale for connected autonomous vehicles is safety. You know, the idea that, you know, when you take out distractions and dependency on human beings that you know, may not, you know, be perfect drivers or can, you know, can talk on their cell phones. If you can take that out, we can improve safety, and thus, you know, we'll prove it, you know, reduce the number of incidents. Hopefully down to practically zero. And it just so happens that traffic incidents are about 25% of the causes of congestion. So connected autonomous vehicles, I think, play a significant role when we talk about TSMO, which aims at improving reliability and reducing congestion. And at this stage, you know, we don't have, I mean, we do have, we did win the ATC MTD grant, if I'm getting that acronym correct. I forget what it stands for, but the federal grant, and many of you are familiar with it, I'm sure. But our award is going toward the funding of a pilot project for a connected freight corridor. I'm not the project expert, but essentially it will involve freight carriers and some communication between the vehicle and some roadside units on a select corridor to transmit safety information, other relevant information related to the freight carriers. And that's pretty much where we stand here at TxDOT. We're like most states and agencies, we're in the early stages of this, but we are engaged in the national research efforts.
Thanks, Marco. Let's get a response from Natalie.
In terms of CAV, really we're just on our initial stages as well with some of this, but we have tried to implement some early initiatives really tied to funding of TSMO type projects is what we've tied these initiatives to. So they're dealing with really sharing data, I think, is really important. As TSMO projects are implemented, traffic signals, for example, they need to have the ability to share the signal stuff into a cloud or directly to a vehicle in the standard format. So that's something that we've put in our requirements for traffic signal projects that are implemented with federal funds that we provide. So we've started to try to identify what are those kind of low-hanging fruit that we can add as a requirement on our TSMO type projects to allow that. We've also looked at, are there network sharing opportunities between different agencies that maybe have fiber networks and these other types of CAV type infrastructure that needs to be put out there. We've looked at, for our 511 system, is there a common platform that we can share with these CAV type vehicles where they could pull the data from this common platform that supports our 511 system and get all the data from one source, because we as a region would combine the sources from different agencies across our region. We've also funded some pilots for CAV. Some are low-speed pilots, as well as some that we're looking for more high-speed facilities, as well as providing information into that traffic signal type cloud. And then in terms of long-term, we are incorporating CAV into our long-range transportation plan, which we're currently working on. It'll be adopted in I think the April timeframe, so over the next several months. And then we've also looked at our managed lane system to see if that, there's been talks about whether that could possibly be our CAV lanes in the future, because many of them are barrier separated. It's a separate system than the general purpose lanes that might allow us to utilize that system as a potential. The challenge is, what do we do when they get off those facilities at the ramps? Do they switch it back to manual? I don't know, but those are discussions that we're definitely having within our organizations related to CAV.
All right, thanks, Natalie. Let's get a response from Iowa DOT.
From Iowa's perspective, we are fairly engaged in the CAV technology and what's going on around the country. Similar to what Marco indicated, we're really interested in it because of the safety and mobility side of things. The reduction of crashes is really what we're focused on. We have had a project going on, a CAV project in one of our urban interstate corridors for about the past year and a half. And really what we're finding out of that study that we're looking at is that Iowa DOT has a lot of data, but we're finding that the data is not very effective for autonomous vehicles. It's okay for people to understand, but not machine ready. So we are really focused right now on trying to come up with what are some data standards that we can have and develop for machine ready data. The other aspect of that is we are also did a study related to infrastructure across I-80 across Iowa for what's the future of CAV and what are the impacts of on our infrastructure. What do we need to do with infrastructure, you know, once CAV is more integrated into more broadly integrated. Oh, and then we also have a service layer plan. One of our 8 service layer plans is for CAV, and that we are kicking off within the next month. We are hoping to kick off that initiative with that. So, we are very, very involved with CAV. We are interested in what it can do for us on the safety and mobility side, and again, we're focused a lot more on the data side, what we can provide in a usable format.
Okay, thanks, Iowa. Solomon, did you get everything that you needed, or do you need someone to elaborate on anything?
I think that was a great discussion and lends itself to future opportunities to look at CAV. But recognizing the time expiration, I'll turn the mic back over to you, Daniel.
All right. Thanks, Solomon. As Solomon mentioned, we are pretty much at our time, actually a little bit over. So with that, we're going to go ahead and say our thank yous to the folks around the roundtable. Thank you so much. The exchange was excellent as expected. So I want to, give you guys a hand and thank you very much for participating in this, in the series of roundtables that we've had over the last couple of months as it pertains to TSMO program plan development. Also, I want to thank the Center of Excellence. Here we have Nilu. Nilu has been very instrumental in the behind the scenes in terms of, pulling this all together in terms of the web room. So we want to thank her and the rest of the folks down at the Center of Excellence, as well as AASHTO, and also Brad Freese down at Tennessee DOT. He's also been very instrumental in helping us pull this together, along with Pat Zielinski from AASHTO. So with that, here's my information in terms of how to get in contact with me. The vision is to have these, quarterly, these TSMO roundtables. As you can see, this one was centered around TSMO program plan development, but there are other themes as it pertains to TSMO that you guys are interested in having a discussion or a roundtable on. Please, by all means, send that information to me, and I will work with the center to pull it together and have a roundtable based on a theme that the TSMO community wants to talk about. Just as an FYI, again, part 1 of this TSMO roundtable, which was held on December the 4th, is on the National Operations Center of Excellence website. So please do go there for part 1. Part 2, once it has been uploaded, will be available as well. With that, thank you guys for participating, and we're going to close this one out.